$620,000. That's the gap between two identical retirements. Same savings, same salary, same withdrawal, same 40% market crash. The only real difference was the exact year the crash happened to arrive. One retiree fully recovered and still left money behind for her grandchildren. The other ran out of money at 74 years old. Meet Carla, 62 years old, a recently retired nurse from small-town Ohio. She patiently saved $1 million across 35 careful, disciplined working years. By every visible measure, Carla had genuinely done absolutely everything right. But Carla retired in the worst possible month and didn't know it. Now meet Diana, 77 years old, who retired in the exact same way. Diana also saved $1 million and withdrew the same amount. Diana later hit a market crash every bit as brutal as Carla's. Yet Diana's portfolio today is worth more than the day she retired. Same plan, same crash, and yet wildly, almost unbelievably different endings. Here's what nobody tells you about a market crash in retirement. The crash itself almost never decides whether your money survives. It's August 2026, and the crash warnings are everywhere again. Headlines scream that stocks are overpriced and a collapse is coming. And this time, the numbers actually give those headlines some teeth. The Shiller CAPE ratio sat above 40 in mid-2026. That measures how expensive stocks are versus their long-term earnings. It has only crossed 40 once before, during the dot-com bubble. So the fear is not irrational. Valuations really are stretched. But here's the trap most people fall into right now. They think surviving a crash is about predicting the crash. It isn't. Nobody has ever reliably predicted a market crash. Not economists, not gurus, not the loud man on YouTube. Whether your retirement survives depends on something far more boring. It depends instead on simple math that you can actually control today. Morningstar just raised its safe withdrawal rate to 3.9%. That was up from just 3.7% the year before. That tiny shift hides an enormous story about risk and timing. Because two people can average the exact same return over 20 years. And one still ends up broke while the other stays rich. The villain has a name, and it's not the crash. It's called sequence of returns risk. Here's what the data shows. Let's keep this fair and run both retirements side by side. Carla and Diana each start with exactly $1 million. Both hold a sensible 60-40 mix of stocks and bonds. Both withdraw $40,000 in year one to live. Both raise that withdrawal a little each year for inflation. Over their full retirements, both portfolios average the same 6%. On paper, these two retirement plans look like completely identical twins. The only variable we change is when the bad years land. Carla is unlucky. Her crash arrives in her very first year. The market falls 15%, then 10%, then 8 more. 3 losing years in a row, right out of the gate. Meanwhile, Carla still needs $40,000 to pay her bills. So she sells shares while prices are near the bottom. Every share she sells at a low price is gone forever. Those sold shares can never ride the eventual recovery back up again. By the time the market heals, Carla has far fewer shares left. Her $1 million has quietly become closer to $600,000. And she is only 3 years into a 30-year retirement. Now look at Diana, who lived the same numbers in reverse. Diana's early years happened to be strong, booming market years. Her portfolio grew before she ever took a painful withdrawal. By the time her 40% crash finally arrived, she was ahead. She was drawing from a pile that had already grown larger. The very same crash hit a bigger, healthier, far better protected balance. Diana sold fewer shares to raise the same $40,000. So more of her money stayed invested for the rebound. When the market recovered, Diana's larger share count exploded upward. That is the entire difference. Not skill, not brains, just timing. Both women averaged 6%. Both followed the same rules. One ran dry at 74. One is richer than ever at 77. This is sequence of returns risk in one clean picture. The order of your returns matters more than the average, and you never get to choose the order those returns arrive in. A crash in year 1 is a completely different animal, but a crash in year 20 barely leaves a visible scratch. Run the numbers, and the timing does almost all the damage. Researchers even named the danger window. They call it the risk zone. It covers the 5 years before and after your retirement date. Hit a bad market inside that window, and the wound goes deep. Hit the same market outside it, and you barely notice. Most people spend that entire decade with no idea it exists. Here's what actually happens to your money in a crash. When you're still working, a crash is almost a gift. Your paycheck keeps buying shares while they're marked way down. You're a shopper walking into a store during a sale. But retirement flips that entire relationship completely upside down on you. Now you're not buying shares, you're selling them to eat. A crash means you sell more shares to raise the same cash. Sell 12 shares at $50 instead of 6 at $100. Those extra shares you burned are permanently gone from your account. When the rebound comes, you own far less to rebound with. This is why early losses do such lasting, invisible damage. The loss isn't just the drop, it's the shares you liquidated. Most people never see this. They only watch the percentage. But the share count is exactly where retirements quietly go to die. Here's a real example that isn't a hypothetical at all. Picture, for a moment, someone who retired on January 1st, 2000. They had $1 million in a standard stock portfolio. They pulled 4% a year, adjusting up for inflation. They walked straight into the dot-com crash almost immediately after retiring. The S&P 500 fell roughly 48% over 2 brutal years. Their portfolio cratered, tried to heal, then got hit again. The 2008 financial crisis slammed the same account a second time. By 2009, that nest egg was worth about $380,000, barely a third of what they started with in 9 years. They did nothing reckless, they just retired at the wrong moment. Now rewind the tape and imagine retiring right after those crashes instead. Same $1 million, same portfolio, and the same 4% withdrawals. But this retiree stepped into the longest bull market in history. By 2020, their balance had climbed past $1.5 million. Same exact strategy, the opposite decade, and a staggeringly different life. That is not a difference in discipline, it's a difference in timing. Let's talk about what a real crash actually looks like. In 2008, the S&P 500 fell 57% from its peak. That drop unfolded over about 517 days. It was the deepest market collapse since at least 1950. Panic said it would never come back. Panic was wrong. The market clawed back to a new high by March 2013. That's roughly 5.5 years from the very top. Painful, yes, but ultimately temporary for anyone who simply stayed invested. The people who got permanently hurt were the ones who sold. They locked in the loss and missed the entire recovery. A paper loss becomes a real loss only when you sell. That single sentence separates survivors from casualties every single time. So how do you actually protect a retirement from all this? The first tool is almost embarrassingly simple, and it is plain cash. Keep 1 to 2 years of spending in plain cash. Not invested, not clever, just sitting there, boring and safe. When the market crashes, you spend from that cash bucket. You leave your stocks completely alone to fall and recover. You never have to sell a single share at the bottom. That cash buffer is what breaks the sequence of returns trap. It buys your portfolio the one thing it needs most, time. Time to recover before you're forced to touch it again. Think of cash as the shock absorber under your retirement. It won't ever grow much, but honestly, that was never its job. Its job is to keep you from selling in a panic. The second tool is flexibility, and it's stronger than it sounds. Rigid retirees withdraw the same amount no matter what markets do. Flexible retirees instead trim their spending a little during the bad years. There's even a formal, tested system for this, and it's called guardrails. It was designed by advisors Jonathan Guyton and William Klinger. The idea is simple. You set an upper and a lower rail. When markets soar, the rules let you spend a little more. When markets crash, you cut your withdrawal by around 10%. Skip one big vacation, delay one new car, trim the edges. That small, temporary spending cut has a genuinely outsized protective effect. It means you sell fewer shares exactly when prices are lowest. Guardrails can even support a higher starting withdrawal, near 5%. But the cut only works if you're actually willing to make it. The math is generous, the discipline is where people fail. Here's what almost nobody tells you about crash-proofing your bills. You don't need your whole portfolio to survive a crash. You just need your essentials covered no matter what happens. Rent, food, insurance, and utilities together form your non-negotiable spending floor. Cover that essential floor with guaranteed income you simply cannot outlive. Social Security is guaranteed income, and it famously never ever crashes. Some retirees add an annuity to lock in a base paycheck. Once your essentials are safe, the market can do whatever it wants. A crash becomes a headline, not a threat to your dinner table. That psychological safety is worth more than any extra percentage point. Calm investors hold. Panicked investors sell. The floor keeps you calm. Now let's talk about the real reason retirements fail in a crash. It usually isn't the math, it's the human being running it. When the market drops 30%, fear takes the wheel. Every single headline screams that this time is somehow finally different. A loud voice online tells you to sell everything now. He tells you cash is king and the system is collapsing. Selling into that fear feels responsible. It feels like control. But it's the single most expensive move a retiree can make. You turn a temporary paper loss into a permanent real one. And you're almost never brave enough to buy back in time. The market recovers while you sit frozen on the sidelines. Most people don't lose to the crash. They lose to their own panic. Your plan's worst enemy is the person staring back in the mirror. The last tool is matching your risk to your actual life. A 30-year-old can hold almost all stocks and sleep fine. A brand new retiree simply cannot, and honestly shouldn't even try to. As you near retirement, you shift toward bonds and stability. Not out of fear, but out of simple, cold math. Bonds are the ballast that steadies the ship in a storm. When stocks crash, your bonds and cash carry the spending load. That balance is what lets you leave your stocks untouched. Being all in on stocks the year you retire is the real gamble. It's not brave, it's sequence of returns, risk with the safety off. Let's bring in Maya, because her situation flips this whole thing around. Maya is just 28, decades away from ever touching her savings. For Maya, a 2026 crash would be fantastic news. Every paycheck would buy her shares at a steep discount. She has 30 years for those cheap shares to grow. Maya should be praying for a crash, not fearing one. This is the part the doom headlines never separate out. A crash is a threat or a gift depending entirely on your age. The same event, the opposite meaning, based entirely on where you stand. If you're decades out, keep buying and ignore the noise. If you're near retirement, that same crash needs a real plan. So what do you do inside that dangerous risk zone? Start quietly building your cash buffer well before you actually retire. In your final working years, deliberately shift your money towards safety. Don't wait until the crash to wish you had cash. By retirement day, you want 1 to 2 years set aside. That way, a brutal first-year crash finds you already fully prepared. Diana didn't beat Carla with genius. She beat her with cash on hand. Preparation in the calm years is what buys peace in the storm. Let's replay Carla's whole disaster with just one small, simple change. Give Carla 2 years of cash before her crash hits. Now when the market falls, Carla spends from cash instead. Now she doesn't sell a single share into the falling decline. Her stocks fall only on paper, then quietly climb all the way back. Her full share count stays completely intact for the entire recovery. 3 years later, Carla's portfolio looks almost nothing like before. The same crash, the same withdrawals, a completely different ending. That one boring decision completely rewrote her entire financial future. That's the whole game. Protect the shares and you protect the retirement. There's one more move that turns a crash into an advantage. It's called rebalancing, and it forces you to buy low. After a crash, your stock slice shrinks below its target. Rebalancing sells a little from bonds and buys cheap stocks. You're quietly buying the recovery itself while everyone else around you panics. It feels wrong in the moment. That's exactly why it works. Discipline beats instinct in every single market crash on record. Study after study keeps landing on the same uncomfortable conclusion. The biggest driver of retirement failure isn't fees or funds. It's behavior. It's what you do when the screen turns red. The average investor badly underperforms the very funds they own. Why? Because they buy in excitement and sell in fear. They do the wrong thing at the worst possible time. A crash doesn't test your portfolio, it tests your patience. And patience, not prediction, is what actually keeps you rich. So what happens if the market really does crash in 2026? If you're young, almost nothing. Keep investing and look away. If you're mid-career, it's really a discount, not a disaster at all. If you retire this year, it depends entirely on your buffer. With cash, flexibility, and a floor, you'll be completely fine. Without them, a 2026 crash could reshape your whole retirement. The crash is not the question. Your preparation is the answer. Notice that none of this required predicting anything at all. We never guessed the date, we just refused to be forced sellers. That is how you survive a crash you can't see coming. Every single month, Carla opened her banking app and watched the same painful number shrink again. She had followed all the standard advice, and still, the market kept punishing her unlucky timing. To pay her mortgage, she sold shares worth barely half of what she had paid for them. Each sale felt small, but together, they quietly hollowed out her entire retirement account over time. By spring, Carla was skipping dinners out and canceling the trips she had promised herself for years. She wasn't reckless or lazy, she simply retired straight into a storm nobody had warned her about. Diana, meanwhile, woke up on that very same crash morning and calmly poured herself a cup of coffee. Her 2-year cash bucket meant the falling market was somebody else's emergency, not hers at all. She paid her monthly bills straight from that cash and let her battered stocks sit completely untouched. While Carla was selling near the bottom, Diana simply waited for the whole storm to pass over. That single difference, one boring bucket of cash, quietly saved Diana's entire retirement outright. This is exactly why professionals obsess over cash long before they ever obsess over returns. A genuinely good advisor will tell you the same unglamorous thing over and over and over again. Keep enough cash that a bad year can never force your hand at the very worst moment. Across town, Maya barely even noticed the crash that was quietly terrifying everyone twice her age. Her investing app kept buying shares automatically, scooping them up cheaper with every single paycheck. For the next 30 years, those discounted shares would compound quietly in the background of her life. The very same red numbers that frightened Carla were secretly building Maya's future fortune instead. A crash, Maya realized, is only ever a tragedy if you're the one being forced to sell. Her older brother, mid-career at 40, treated the very same dip like a giant clearance sale too. He nudged a little extra into his 401k while his coworkers panicked and simply froze. 20 full years from retirement, he had all the time in the world to be patient. Their father remembered 2008 vividly when raw fear talked him into selling everything he had. He locked in a brutal loss, then watched helplessly from the sidelines as the market roared back. That one single panicked decision cost him far more than any actual market crash ever could. He tells the whole family the same hard warning now. The crash didn't ruin me, my fear did. Notice how the exact same market treated these four people in four completely different ways. The market itself never changed. Only their age, their cash reserves, and their nerve were different. Same storm, four boats, some had lifeboats, one leapt overboard, and one was just passing through. So where exactly should that precious cash buffer actually live while it waits for a rainy day? A boring high-yield savings account is perfect. It earns a little and it simply never falls. You want that money accessible, calm, and completely disconnected from the stock market's daily mood. The point of it isn't to grow at all. The point is that it's simply always there. Let's make the flexible spending idea painfully concrete with a real number you can actually picture. Say you plan to withdraw $50,000 from a $1 million portfolio this year. The market drops hard, so the guardrail rule quietly trims that down to $45,000 instead. $5,000 less for a single year is a mild inconvenience, not a real catastrophe. But those unsold shares, left alone to recover, can quietly be worth tens of thousands later. You're really just trading one modest vacation now for years of extra runway down the road. That is the entire trick here. Small, temporary sacrifices that protect enormous permanent long-term gains. Diana did exactly this, and in the crash year, she quietly skipped her big planned cruise. She kept the lights on, the fridge full, and her portfolio almost entirely fully intact. 1 year later, the market fully recovered, and she happily booked 2 cruises to make up for it. Carla, by contrast, had no guaranteed floor sitting beneath her essential monthly living bills. Every rent check depended on selling something, even when selling was the single worst possible move. Had she simply covered her basics with steady income, the whole crash would have felt survivable. Social Security already gave Carla a small floor, but on its own, it just wasn't quite enough. An advisor later gently showed her how one simple annuity could have covered the entire rest. With her essentials fully guaranteed, she would never have been a forced seller in the first place. This is also exactly why researchers keep nudging that safe withdrawal rate so slowly and carefully. Morningstar's 3.9% isn't random at all. It's calibrated to survive ugly early years. Draw much more than that into a crash, and the underlying math starts working against you fast. Draw a little less, stay genuinely flexible, and even a brutal decade becomes fully survivable. Remember that risk zone, those 10 fragile years sitting right around your retirement date? Carla was standing right in the dead middle of it when her crash suddenly arrived. Diana had luckily already banked several strong early years before hers ever showed up. You can't control which of them you'll be, so you simply prepare as if you're Carla. Even Maya, decades away from it all, quietly started a small cash habit for the far future. Not because she needs it now, but because good habits are always easiest when you're young. Her brother rebalanced right through the dip, selling a slice of bonds to buy cheaper stocks. It felt deeply uncomfortable, buying while every single headline screamed the whole world was ending. But that very discomfort was precisely the clearest sign that he was doing the right thing. Their father, older and much wiser now, finally understood clearly what he had gotten so wrong. He hadn't lacked money back in 2008. He had lacked a plan and a real buffer. So he sat down and helped Carla build the exact cash cushion he desperately wished he'd had. John sat down with Diana and carefully mapped her whole spending onto a single sheet of paper. They circled all the essentials in green and the optional extras in a flexible, trimmable red. Cover the green no matter what, he said, and just let the red flex with the market. When Carla finally built her own buffer, her entire relationship with the daily news totally changed. Crash headlines that once made her stomach drop became simple background noise she could easily ignore. She realized she had spent whole years fearing a monster she could have simply prepared for. Here's the deeply uncomfortable part that nobody selling you panic ever actually wants to admit. The tools that genuinely save your retirement are cheap, boring, and available to absolutely everyone. Cash, flexibility, a floor, and patience cost nothing at all but the discipline to actually use them. There is no secret fund, no magic timing signal, and no guru anywhere worth the subscription. The loud man promising to perfectly call the next crash has never once done it reliably. And even if he somehow did, you'd still panic and sell at exactly the wrong moment anyway. Preparation beats prediction every single time, simply because preparation never actually needs to be right. You don't have to know when the storm comes if you already packed a good umbrella. Maya put it best in the plain, easy way that only someone with real time can afford. If I never have to sell in a panic, she shrugged, then the panic can't actually reach me. Diana, decades older, had arrived at the exact same quiet conclusion from the far other side. The crash came for her too. It simply found her already standing calmly on very solid ground. And Carla, wiser and finally fully prepared, slowly stopped fearing the next crash altogether. She had turned the single scariest thing in her retirement into a manageable, almost boring checklist. 4 different people, 1 shared market, and the only real variable was how ready each one was. Which brings us straight to the part that almost nobody is ever fully honest with themselves about. Run this same crash through 1,000 different retirements, and the underlying pattern never really changes. The prepared ones bend and recover, while the unprepared ones break and never quite come back. Every advisor who has personally lived through a real crash will tell you the very same thing. The clients who genuinely thrived weren't the smartest ones, they were simply the best prepared ones. You don't rise to the level of your optimism, you fall to the level of your buffer. Their father summed up his whole hard-won lesson in a single quiet sentence to his grown kids. "Build the boat well before the storm," he said, because the storm never sends any warning ahead. So before we finally reach the twist, hold tightly onto that one stubborn, life-changing idea. And here's the twist almost no one talks about out loud. The people who fear the crash the most are usually safe. Their healthy fear makes them hold cash and stay genuinely flexible. The people who actually get destroyed are usually the confident ones. They stayed all in on stocks, sure they'd ride it out. Then the crash came, the fear hit, and they sold anyway. Overconfidence, not the market itself, is what quietly empties the account. But here's the deeper truth hiding underneath all of it. A market crash is not a financial event. It's an emotional test. The math to survive one has been known for decades. Cash buffer, flexible spending, a guaranteed floor, and simple patience. None of it is complicated. None of it is secret. Yet millions of people will still fail the very next crash completely. It's not because they didn't actually know what to do here, but because knowing and doing are 2 very different things. So here is the one single line truly worth remembering forever. A crash doesn't decide your retirement. Your reaction to it does. The market provides the storm, you decide whether you drown. Carla and Diana proved it with the exact same money. The difference was never the crash, it was the preparation. And preparation is the one crucial part you completely control yourself. Think about how freeing that actually is for a moment. You can't control the market, the headlines, or the timing. But you can control your cash, your spending, and your nerve. That's not a small thing at all. That's the entire ballgame. The retiree who prepares sleeps through the crash that ruins others. So let's bring this whole thing all the way back home. A crash in 2026 might come, or it might not. Either way, you now know it was never the real threat. The real threat was being forced to sell at the bottom. And you now have 4 tools to make sure you never are. Keep 1 to 2 full years of spending in cash, always. Stay flexible enough to trim spending in the ugly years. Cover your essentials with steady income that simply cannot crash. And match your risk to how close retirement really is. Do those 4 things, and a crash becomes a headline. Not a catastrophe, just whether you were built to withstand. The next time someone swears the market is about to collapse, don't panic. Ask yourself one question instead. Am I a forced seller? If the answer is no, then the crash simply cannot ruin you. That single question is worth more than 1,000 predictions. If this showed you something new about your money, subscribe to Wealth POV. We break down the hidden math behind the decisions you face every day. Make the decision that matches your reality, not someone else's sales pitch. Because surviving a crash was never about timing the market. It was about refusing to let the market time you.